Welcome. I'm so excited to be back with you, Glenn, as we're making America sacred again. I am blessed to have the opportunity to work with Glenn. He is the author of Original Politics, Making America Sacred Again, which was, he had a divine experience. We're going to get into a little bit and talk about what inspired him, and then open this container for me to be inspired and take it to the next step of interviewing other great people like Glenn. So, if you don't know me, I'm Millie Kanata. I'm the founder of Own Your Dreams Academy, a consulting hub designed to look at every aspect of your life, the wholeness, the wheel of life, and see who you might better your life with if you have a teacher present or a consultant available for you. So, with that, one of our special guest, obviously, who coined this for me, was making America sacred again, is Glenn. And Glenn, I wanted to dive in a little deeper. We had a chat on Friday, I believe it was, where we
hmm
kind of touched the surface of some of these topics. So welcome and thank you again for joining us.
Good to be with you, Millie,
I'm so
on the
excited.
1st of December.
It's so good. It's so good. I just love that we're rolling the way we are. Everything's flowing as it should. So that's always great. So, first, what I want to do is just really, not everybody knows who you are. So, I wanted to just go through a little snippet of who Glenn is, just to kind of give more depth into this person we get to experience today. So, Glenn, see, I told you I was going to mess it up. Glenn Aparicio. I said it totally fine, but when I get nervous, I can't speak clearly. But Glenn Aparicio Parry, Glen Aparicio
Aparicio, you
Parry.
could do
I'm gonna get it
it.
right, but okay. So he's a multifaceted individual with a rich background in education, eco-psychology, and political philosophy. He's an author. He has two-time Nautilus Award. He's a two-time Nautilus Award winning author of the books such as Original Politics, Making America Sacred Again, which was released in 2020, which explores the influence of Native American traditions on American politics and encourages a revolution of love, wisdom, and compassion, which inspired this portal today and to continue. And then also he had originally released Original Thinking, which is a radical revisioning of time, humanity, and nature, released in 2015, which is a thought-provoking work that challenges conventional thinking, as you described before, even just the difference of how people perceive the word original, being that I'll have you go into more depth on that, but often we in the Western world see original as, the first, something new, nothing ever created before, whereas the idea of original would be more like the original teachings potentially of, maybe what Corn had taught to us. Would you say I conceptualize that correctly?
Yeah, original instructions or just something that's timeless, that's both old and new, both place and time.
Right. So something that is, yeah, different and thinking is one thing I want to touch on, definitely. And then Glenn is going to be releasing Original Love, the Timeless Source of Wholeness, which will come out in February, just before Valentine's Day. So you guys will have to check into that. Um, oh, this one, it's the final of his trilogy that you didn't quite know you were going to be producing, but here we are highlighting them. I'm excited to delve into all of your thoughts and how you're just so well versed in how conceptualizing everything. Glenn is an educator and eco-psychologist. And so Parry is, or wait, sorry, he's adjacent facility. Sorry, I can't even speak. So can you first, I would love to get into more of like, what is the eco-psychologist and your work through California Institute of Integral Studies? What is that?
Oh, okay. Well, it's very interesting that you brought up the word eco-psychology. Yeah, that is a favorite of mine. I mean, most people may not realize, but the whole discipline of psychology is extremely new. It came about at the end of the 19th century. and once we established the idea of psychology, we started to imagine, I say we, the general society, particularly academe, starts to imagine that there's a psyche within your head, Millie, and a psyche within my head, or something. And so we've taken away the psyche, that the original meaning of psyche, anima mundi, the world soul, it's soul. Psyche is soul. It's coming from nature. It's coming from the nature through us. So, but with psychology, the discipline, we tried to separate it out, and then we really needed to connect it back together. It took a long time to make the idea come forward of eco psychology as an academic discipline, and there's a few schools that offer PhDs in that. Yeah.
I see. And so the eco being like I keep saying circle, like embodying the wholeness of it, of the whole psyche.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah. Before eco psychology, there was, when we when they created psychology, they had to create sociology immediately after that because they realized they cut off the psyche from the social
Community.
world. So they created sociology. All these disciplines are really all should be wrapped in together. Nature doesn't have like a place on it where there's geography, and a place where there's history, and there's a place where there's science, and a place where there's psychology. It's all there in the land, if that
I
makes sense.
totally does.
It's all
It's like
there.
those teachings have been compartmentalized and separated from the whole, and so dissected, but
Yeah.
yet not conceptualized through the fullness of it. And as I mentioned before, I would love to bring you back because you also are president and founder of the Seed Institute. And so I'm delving into being a seed keeper. And so thank you for your service there. We look forward to having you talk more about that later. You're also podcast
Okay.
host of Circle for Original Thinking podcast. Where do you host that?
Where do I host it? I'm not sure what you mean by that, but it's hosted. It's a I usually host it on Zoom, and then just
Uh-huh.
like you're doing, it's you can find the podcast anywhere podcasts are found. Whether it's Spotify or Apple Podcast or what have you. It generates to every single one each time we do a show. I think
Very
you do the
cool.
same thing.
Like YouTube and whatnot. They just look up original thinking and they can find you on every platform.
Circle for Original Thinking. Yeah,
Circle.
podcast. You could find that, and it's also on my website. Which is originalthinking.us or glenaparicio.com, but that's longer.
Glen
So
Aparicio Parry.
originalthinking.us.
I said it right
Yeah,
finally.
then you have to remember how to spell it, right? But it's
Yeah,
just originalthinking.us, or as or us,
yeah. I
if you
like how that
prefer.
flows. Very cool. Well, now I butchered your introduction. I am much more calmer and I'll be able to get through this interview. I appreciate you for helping me break that up. So when we spoke on the last live, we were chatting a bit about your experience that inspired you, and it was you were on a train car and they placed you in a car for dinner where you had really no choice, and you want to tap into that a little bit and expand on your experience from Red Hawk.
Oh, well, yeah, that was a beautiful, just serendipitous occasion Amtrak basically provided my own focus group. So I found out, I had a Trump supporter from Lawrence, Kansas. I had a gay African American poet who supported Bernie Sanders but thought he was too far to the right, and I had a Native American who used to be in media from Oklahoma. I'm calling him Red Hawk, and he uh, they all got into a dialogue because I asked them, what's the sacred purpose of America? And Red Hawk stayed silent through almost all of it, as I did mostly. I just asked questions mostly. And but at the end, Red Hawk spoke very eloquently about how Native America has really been the source of the core values of the United States. And that was very inspirational to me. And in fact, that I already was thinking about writing the book, but having this experience cemented it for me, and I knew what I needed to do. I knew where the focus needed to be around the sacred purpose of America, which eventually I found out, not that moment, but eventually I found out is really, in my view, unity in diversity. And when I say unity in diversity, it's really the same thing as looking at, if you, and I don't recommend you do this, but if you looked at the sun, I think our esteemed president did this, but if you look at the sun without, and you know it's a whole sphere, but there are also individual rays of the sun, and those all have their own essence. That's what I mean by unity in diversity. Everybody's different. Everybody's carrying their own vibration. Everybody is bringing a little something different to the table, but we're all one ultimately.
It's a beautiful thing. It's something I'm able to feel, but I'm not able to say as clearly. So I appreciate you for putting that together. And so,
Hmm.
like you have inspired me to this whole idea of making America sacred again. And I wanted to also mention that you said it reignites the sacred flame of America's purpose and bringing an understanding and healing between diverse people, which honors, our uniqueness within, but at the same time understanding, like, we can't separate the psyche from sociology. It is a wholesomeness that we have to look at. And so I look forward to delving into that wholesomeness of it. Also, I wanted to
Hmm.
mention when I first met you, I downloaded your book through Audible. And of course, through the different distractions and things, I wasn't able to really catch everything. And then I purchased a book and I was able to read it. And it was interesting to recognize the difference in understanding and depth, even. And so I just want to shout out to people out there if you are looking into this. Sometimes I'll listen and read a book because it's easier for me to like get the wholeness of it. So I advise that to people out there. Do read it. It's definitely, it gives you a whole different experience. And
Hmm.
touch on your dedication as to the ancestors. I know last time we did speak about, how important our ancestors are, but you dedicated this book specific to our ancestors. Will you elaborate on that?
Um, I I really dedicate my life to the ancestors, so
Thank you.
dedicating the book is just a spin-off, really, because for me, our ancestors they're the ones that when they pass into the spirit world, they take up residence in my heart, and the same thing would be true for you, I'm sure. And then I'm really living my life to try to complete the sacred purpose that my ancestors had. And they sometimes give guidance with regard to that when I go into prayer. And so, as much as I am able to, I will follow the advice of the ancestors. I think I might have mentioned last time, sometimes the ancestors are a little impatient. They don't necessarily want you to have any fun. They see the purpose you've got to accomplish. Us humans, we also have to stop and have some fun, because that too much work will make what was that saying? The make Jack a dull boy or something. You have to
Yeah.
you have to laugh. You have to be in communication with people. and have fun because and the body has that kind of fun. The ancestors probably because they're out of body may not want you to stop and do that. But I'll tell you, there is the most important thing is to do what the ancestors see. And so I also dedicated the book Original Love to the ancestors as well. And you asked about 7 generations, the next 7 generations. I actually remember my publisher asking me about that. Why are you saying the seven? They weren't familiar with the idea. And I just said, I mean, just think of it as looking far ahead. And really, we're also healing the ancestors, in our work. So it's really 7 generations forward and 7 generations backward that we're working with. That makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah, it, I get the image of like, I don't know if that's the right word, but the Taurus or something as far as our body and such. But thank you. It's
Cool. I like
interesting.
that.
Yeah, expansion. Um, so let me see. So, okay, one with nature and the 7 generations. Okay, so your book is amazing, and I wouldn't be able to summarize it as well as you do. So I give you some, just kind of teaser, give us a little bit of taste of what we're diving into as we delve into your book. Um, could you go into more about what it means to be human and, being one with nature? What's that mean to you? It was basically we've been disconnected from our humanness was something you've stated in your book.
Okay, so let me start by merely by saying there's 4 parts to the book, Original Politics. And the first part is unitive consciousness. The second is dance of the opposites. The third is maximum diversity. And the fourth is return to wholeness. So each part has a positive aspect and a negative aspect. The positive of unitive consciousness is what we just spoke about, unity in diversity. But I call them evolve mode and devolve mode. The devolve mode would be totalitarianism, homogeneity. As Alfonso Montori told me once, a professor at California Institute of Integral Studies, when I was a student in 2003, he told me, unit of consciousness does have a shadow side, and that's fascism or totalitarianism, where everybody agrees, but they agree on the same thing. So there's a kind of unity, but it's a unity by conformity. So that's really important to realize each can have a negative or a positive aspect or an evolved or devolved mode. Dance of the opposites is the same thing. The evolved mode is a healthy spark between opposites, where you think about masculine and feminine, night and day. These things need each other; they complete each other. But the devolved mode is factions, which is something the factions or division. That's something the founding fathers were hypersensitive about. They didn't want to have any factions. They didn't even want to have any political parties. Now, in this case, they were very, very naive. And you have to realize the founding fathers were very young. They were like in their 20s. I mean, at the time of the Constitutional Convention, um, Hamilton was 28 years old and Madison was 32 years old. That's as old, only Ben Franklin was an old sage at the Constitutional Convention. He was different. He was different. He already had kidney stones and gout. But most of them were super young. So they had some naivete, but they also got a lot of things done at a young age. Um, and we'll get into it a little bit about how much they were inspired by Native America. That's super important. We don't want to give the founding fathers too much credit because they may have been brilliant in a lot of ways, but they did have certain good examples. Okay, so the third part of the book is called Maximum Diversity, and that's basically where we are today. You know, we're in where the evolve mode would be this cooperation, you know, between the diverse aspects of society, but the devolve mode would be exclusion, trying to push people out. That's actively happening today. Okay. And then the fourth part of the book, which really is looking into mostly the future, I called Return to Wholeness. So it's really an integration of this and a preparation for the next cycle. So that is that would also have a devolve mode if it moved back toward fascism or became completely fascist nation. The United States is on the precipice of becoming a fascist nation today, and it also still has the possibility of fulfilling its sacred purpose. And that's where my prayers go. Enough said.
Yes, I hear you. One thing I wrote, five arrows cannot be broken, a symbol of the Confederacy. That was, can you elaborate on what that means?
Okay, well, that's a bit of a story, but I'll try to make it as succinct as possible.
I like your
The
stories.
Haudenosaunee, who greatly inspired the formation of the political nation of the United States, they had their own origin story, which came about because the someone they just call Peacemaker, who was not from the any of the five nations, but came from someplace else. Um, that that the Peacemaker um, taught peace to the people, and he got the five nations, the Cayuga, the Seneca, the Mohawk, the Oneida, and the Onondaga, to unite. And before then, they were mired in their own wars, but they united, and they united by they built a great tree. There was a great tree of peace, which had roots spreading out in all the directions. And on top of that tree, they placed an eagle. Now, this is not a coincidence that the eagle later becomes a symbol of the United States of America. So that eagle was a symbol of peace. He was sitting atop the great tree of peace. And they buried their weapons. They partially uprooted the tree. They buried their weapons in the tree. And they made this sacred pact. Okay. And in that origin story, the peacemaker said to the people that these five arrows, if bundled together, would not break, but a single arrow you could break over your leg. Um, that story becomes later to the colonists because it's Ben Franklin who has a friendship with the Onondaga chief Kana Astego, and Canastego addresses the colonists on July 4th, 1744, exactly 32 years before the Declaration of Independence. And he tells the colonists that they should unite. In this case, there's 13 colonies, that they should unite like the five fingers of one hand, like the Iroquois or Haudenosaunee Confederacy have done. Never fall out with one another, he tells them. And he demonstrates then to Ben Franklin. He hands Ben Franklin an arrow. Ben Franklin, and then he grabs it back from Ben Franklin and breaks it over his knee. Then he reaches behind him for a sheaf of arrows. Maybe it was 13, maybe it was 10, who knows, but it was a sheaf of arrows. And he shows that if you try to break that over your knee, you can't break it. Ben Franklin never forgot that. And that is why on the United States, the Great Seal of the United States, there is an eagle who has the sheaf of 13 arrows. And in his other talon, he has an olive branch. So that's a symbol of peace as well. So that's the story.
I love it. That's the thing is we overlook so much symbolism in our lives, and it just right there, piercing. And the evergreen tree, that was the solidarity of United Nations, solidity of the United Nations, basically. And so, and then I made some notes. So, um, breaking it down, it comes back to like embodying our humanness, right? And our psyche and, connecting our spirits within to fully embody ourselves. And so that's where at some point in time it appears people got disconnected from self. And so then it's like, well, what does it mean to be human? And I think that's what Native Americans embodied, at least for my experience with them, and being raised by, like, we lived all of it. The hardships, the beauty, like, and it's how do you explain that, please? Like, what does it mean to be human?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, thank you for coming back to that because I don't think I addressed that. If you read between the lines, maybe, but it's really simple. In the Renaissance, the Western cultures started to elevate the human as separate and transcendent from nature. But in indigenous societies and in ancient Western societies, actually, that wasn't done. So it used to mean that what it meant to be, it used to be that what it meant to be human was to be connected to all there is. We're two-legged. We stand between earth and sky, Mother Earth and Father Sky. We have an opportunity to be connected to all there is. And actually, we are. I mean, scientifically, we are. We have 98 point something percent of DNA as a chimpanzee has, but we have 50% the same DNA as a banana. I love to say that because it's really important because we are interconnected with everything. We're completely interconnected with everything. So I would say that the indigenous view is more accurate, actually, than the idea that humans can be separate and transcendent. And that just has got us in a lot of trouble. The idea that humans can do for humans, and that happened under Socrates. It's a long time ago now in the West. But the idea, Socrates once said something very, very suspect. I mean, I basically didn't dislike Socrates because at least he was a philosophical dude. But he once said something I completely disagree with. He said that he learned more from men in the village square than he did walking in nature. And I said, what?
Disconnect.
I don't agree with that.
When I think also he was like, in order to reach enlightenment or whatnot, it was about being scholarly or academia versus the wholeness. So yeah, he,
Well,
he
Socrates had a lot of. Oh, I'm sorry, Millie. Sorry.
go
Go ahead.
ahead. I was babbling. Continue.
I was going to say Socrates had a lot of good qualities, and he's the one who said, know oneself. He was a listener. He never claimed to have wisdom or knowledge more than somebody else. He had a lot of good qualities, a lot of good qualities, but he also is the beginning of this idea that the greater good is for humans alone, rather than the greater good in what I call original politics. The biggest, most important concept in the book really is that original politics includes the natural world. It includes what nature wants to happen. So tribal councils traditionally don't make decisions on the basis of only what's good for humans. They also are considering the natural world. And Western politics has gotten into a lot of trouble by only considering humans, and then they step back and they say, "Oh my God, we have climate change. Oh my God, we have this, we have that, we have soil erosion, we have air pollution, we have all these other things that we were paying no attention to. Now we're going to try to shift and pay attention to them." But really, what they should realize all along is that we are made of the elements. We're light, air, water, earth. So You can't separate the human from nature. The phrase human nature is a very funny phrase because but it's a good one perhaps because human nature really is has to include at least half of nature. So there you go.
It
That
couples
makes
it.
sense?
It does, yes.
Yeah.
And that's where we are reminded, by the chaos of Mother Earth that we're not in control as much as we try to control our nature. We realize
Uh,
it will overcome. Well, it makes us humble, doesn't it? But that's,
yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
great segue into so how did or how do Native Americans arrive at their viewpoints of the world and in council? So like I understand my seventh great grandmother was Nanny who is known as Nancy Ward, and she's was named the beloved woman with the Cherokee, and they from what my teachings, that the women really stood a powerful position in decisions, and that totally was kind of lost in our politics until we were able
Mm.
to vote in
Well,
1960 something. But yeah, can you elaborate more on like what the difference
well,
or however that, yeah.
yeah. Well, that's a question. It's a good question you ask because it's one that I point out in the book, Original Politics, is rarely asked. The colonists, I want to say this carefully, the colonists, unbeknownst to themselves, were arrogantly assuming that they had reached a more advanced stage than the Indians they encountered. How did they come to that? If we're really kind and compassionate, it's this concept of the so-called white man's burden and all that. It's all wrapped up in a peculiar way of looking at time. That's why the first book, Original Thinking, was said to be a radical revisioning of time, humanity, and nature. I'm always looking at the concept of time because it holds the key to how colonization came about. Because for the colonists, they they looked at the Indians, and I'm using the word Indians. You could use Native Americans, you could use whatever. I apologize if it offends anybody, but it's a word that a lot of my Native friends use. It's also uh, but let's not get sidetracked on that right now. But they looked at the Indians and they thought that these people were, and that's where they got the word, Columbus got Los Indios, with God indwelling spirit or something. They looked at them as almost like from their mythical Garden of Eden culture so that they were in tune with nature. They had not left the garden. And so they, in their minds, they had left the garden because they had made linear progress. And this is the problem with the idea of linear progress, because um, it's really a very deceptive term. And and progress is actually a word that we use when in place of really distance from the origin. This is something the philosopher Jean Gaveser said. He said that, what is original is something that's timeless. But the people who are accepted this idea of linear time, they just move from the origin outward and they call that and they start tracking that as linear time. And so they look at anybody that's connected with the iterative cycles of nature as somehow not progressing like they did. But that is a shadow side of themselves. They don't realize that they're being arrogant, perhaps, or maybe they do realize it, but mostly they don't realize it. And they just think of Indians as being somehow noble and beautiful, but there's not a real understanding of the depth of their knowledge and culture. Now there are exceptions. So Roger Williams was an exception in the this would be 17th century, and he arrives in 1632, and he made a lot of friendships with Miyano Tomi, with the Sachem of the Wampanoag, which is a loose confederation of tribes. He made a lot of friendships. He learned 5 native languages. He wrote a book about a key into the language of America. Roger Williams was a true exception, and Ben Franklin really admired Roger Williams. So Ben Franklin is another exception, and it might not seem obvious to people because he used words like savages to describe Indians, but that word meant wild and untamed back then. So he may have been using it as a racist slur. He may have been using it only to try to connect to his other colonizers. But whatever it was, Ben had some true friendships with Native America. And he was a real bridge person because he was a scientist and inventor and whatnot, but he also connected well with Native America. So he's a very interesting person, and we don't have time to go into everything about Ben Franklin. But this is the point. I mean, you're talking about how did they arrive at their worldview? Well, let me give you this answer. A lot of Native stories talk about an awakening where they became aware that they were mistreating the natural world, that they were misusing it, that they were misusing resources, and that's not even a good word, resources, but they were plundering the earth in some ways, and they changed. So they realized how dependent they were upon the earth. These stories are well documented in a lot of native cultures. So I would argue that the native people were actually, if anything, more advanced when they met the colonists, and they were the ones who were teaching the Western people something that the Western world is still learning, how dependent we are on the natural world for our survival.
It is all of that. There's so much in there, that I relate to and want to pick apart. Hold on. So, ego, savage, these words, and so for me, I see savage as actually like a good thing. You're not contained in a box and all of that. So I've learned to appreciate that ego. So, where I just started a study on Ayurveda, and it was talking about their origin story of, creation and how it comes in and filters through ego, and so, um, and ego's come up a lot. Not to get stuck on that, but there's one, I want to go back a little bit. So these age groups, right? And when you are like, for me, I see women, we have archetypes of the maiden mother, and then they say the crone, but I found actually there's a fourth archetype deleted. It's maiden mother, wild woman, and crone. And when I relate to
Oh.
these, it basically, I now know I'm embodying my wild woman phase. And that's where, I went through being a maiden, and I carry that knowledge with me. And then I have my mother knowledge, and then, transitioning or moving into a phase where I can take all that information and then be able to use action. And then the crone gets, they're just wise wisdom keepers and share, but they don't have the energy per se to take the action. And so, in relation to the men that were considered founding fathers that worked with these natives, I could see how the younger ones were put into action, but yet more naive because they didn't quite have the experience and all of that, and I think our politics, like the president has to be 36 now, right? To be president. Is that correct?
35, I think, but yeah,
35.
pretty close. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and it's because our understanding. And so that's where, as I'm an elder, coming into my elder, and my role, is, well, I'm a wild woman, so I'm to protect the kids and the elders, and because the kids, their brains haven't developed till they're what, 25. And so that's where this new knowledge of, what they experience, looking at our founding fathers and history, and how I see we all came from a clan at some point, just have been disconnected from that nature aspect of who we are, I guess. Sometimes some more further along in history on that linear timeline. And so then, I see they, in a sense, were groomed by that system, moved here and carried those things with them. So it was hard to be separate. Whereas Franklin, being more evolved in his humanness, he may have different relations and understanding. And then also the concept of what actual words mean, like savage, may not be a bad word. For me, it's not. So all of that was some juicy tidbits I took from that. And then when there's so much from your book without like reading it to the audience, that's where it's really hard. Like, so the influence of the natives and how the sacredness of living and like how they had, experience in our history, we see globally, we've had to continue to evolve and devolve, and I guess the dance of the polarities, right? So the dual aspects of wholeness and changes in politics and parties. So let's lead into that. So that what are the dual aspects of wholeness? And what explain?
Do between the parties, the
Or
Republican and the Democratic Party, the modern ones.
yeah, so there's been changes in parties. One thing that you had mentioned, how what we see as democracy today actually could be more of a example of what republic was back when, and vice versa. So can you weave that in more in detail for?
Okay. Well, the United States has never really been a true democracy. That word is used all the time,
Yeah.
but it's a republic, and the difference is really simple. You think of like ancient Greece in Athens or something, where everybody has a vote and everybody has a say. That only works in a relatively small village. A representational republic is when we, the people, elect our representatives, and then they operate from there. Their accountability is only in that if they do something that the people do not like, then you don't reelect them. So that's the simple difference. But in a way, the difference is language is living. So it almost at this point, republic is a word that people don't use very much, and democracy is one that they use a lot. So they really mean a representational democracy or something like that. Anyway, what was your other question?
Yes, my dog is snoring. So if you hear that, I got my little warmer here.
Oh, well, that gives me a great opportunity. Can I tell a story?
Please do.
Oh, well, that's so funny that your dog is snoring because there's a story I tell in Original Politics, which is a very important story. Now, I probably made a small mistake in telling that story in the way that I told it because I said it's a White Mountain Apache story, and it is White Mountain Apache story, but they weren't really rug weavers. I think in the book I said that an old woman is weaving a beautiful rug. So, uh, but as she nears completion of the rug, her her she gets up to stir a soup that's on the fire. But when she gets up to stir the soup, her black dog, who's been sleeping in the corner, awakens, and the dog takes a thread of the rug and pulls on it with his teeth, and pulls and pulls and pulls until he almost unravels the entire rug. The woman returns. She does not get mad at her dog. She just simply picks up a thread and stares into the rug for the longest time until she reimagines an even more beautiful way to reweave the rug in beauty and harmony. Because, you know, it was beautiful and harmonious, but then the dog tore it apart. But the thing about the story that's really important is that, and there are many other comparable stories with tapestries and whatnot, and they're all about the same thing, which is that the black dog is necessary. In we are not perfect as humans, and we can't make perfection. This is why Navajo rugs actually always leave some imperfection in the rug. And there's a lot of Japanese customs that follow that same edict, my wife being Japanese, that I'm aware of. So, so the black dog or the trickster figure is sometimes necessary to shake things up. And it's very obvious. I tell this story in Original Politics before I start the chapters that deal with the rise of Donald Trump into power. So Donald Trump is a trickster figure. Uh, and that is both dangerous and it is an opportunity for growth. It's an opportunity to see the nation as it really is, and then you can make substantive changes. Because when things unravel, then you see what was already there before. It was already there before. We already were a racist country. We already were a sexist country. It's not something that Donald Trump invented. He just simply was a catalyst for revealing the American shadow. And that in some ways has been good, and you never know what's good news or bad news, but in some ways that has been good because the beginning of Trump's first term, we had the Women's March, and more women than ever got to. It was the largest movement in the world at that time, later to be exceeded by the Black Lives Matter. Both happened during Donald Trump's first presidency. So, these things are a little bit tricky. You know, if you don't mind, I'd kind of like to bring it to part that is not in my book at all, but how it applies today. Would that be all right, Nilly?
Yes, I'd love to. And first, though, here's my little black dog. Oh, you can't see him now. I don't know. Let me see if
He
I
is
can.
black too. Oh my God, that's
Oh,
amazing.
I won't. He's not going to work. But
I can
yeah,
see a piece of him. Yeah.
yeah, he's my little catalyst. It weaves so well in my own personal story. And I am delighted for you to tap into this because there's so much on that topic. I can't remember there, but yes, please jump in.
Okay. Well, Alexander Hamilton said something once where he speaks about when a man unprincipled in private life, bold in his temper, despotic in his demeanor, when he sows the seeds of chaos, he does it because he wants to throw things into confusion so that he may ride the storm and direct the whirlwind. The last part of it is a direct quote. So he may ride the storm and direct the whirlwind. That's what Alexander Hamilton said, and I would say that's one of the ways that's the big MO of Mr. Trump, our current president. He is a catalyst for chaos because then that can further his agenda of accruing more power. But with that said, um, I I don't want to put too much emphasis on Mr. Trump because the truth of the matter is, and I've thought about this even more since completing this book, because even though I had a chapter in Original Politics called Fascist America or Sacred America, and I was very concerned about it then, and truthfully, that came from spirit, that came from the ancestors back in 2016, that idea. But we moved closer to it in the first Trump presidency. We're much closer to it now. We're on the precipice of becoming a fascist nation. And but here's the thing. We've been moving that way all along. So in the very beginning, we took, and Ben Franklin wrote the Articles of Confederation, closely mirroring the Iroquois law of peace. And under the Articles of Confederation, politicians did not have anywhere near the power that they have today. They all served um, limited terms. The maximum was 3 years, and they none of them received any salary for their action, and they nor did they receive any emoluments, which is a fancy term for any special gifts, bribes, this, that you're not supposed to get. And that is how that's how we operated under the Articles of Confederation, which were the law of the land from 1781 until 1789, when the Constitution becomes ratified, and then we go under the U.S. Constitution. At the Constitutional Convention, which was held, somewhere like 1788, where they were trying to ratify the Constitution, they had this convention and they were hashing things out. The idea for the Constitutional Convention came because they knew they needed to do something with the Articles of Confederation, because the Articles of Confederation were so closely aligned with Native values that taxation was completely voluntary. And that works in Native America. The idea that, we're going to help out when it's needed, but it doesn't work for white people. I hate to say it, because if they're not forced to pay taxes, they're not going to do it. So the states, the you know weren't paying their taxes during the Revolutionary War, even though the young nation, was going into extreme debt. And so they needed something to figure out how to pay off those costs. And so they had this Constitutional Convention. They knew they were going to at least revise somewhat the Articles of Confederation. But during that Constitutional Convention, two sides emerged. One was the New Jersey plan was for these subtle changes to the Articles of Confederation. And Ben Franklin was on that side. He just wanted, in lieu of a president at all, he wanted a council. He wanted a council. And what people don't realize is there were presidents under the Articles of Confederation, but they operated from 1781 to 1789. There was a president that served a 1 year term, so there were 8 different presidents. And John Hancock actually served twice, once before they were ratified and once after they were ratified. So uh, they were presidents, but they had no real power. It's very similar to a Native American chief who derives his power from the council. But at the Constitutional Convention, they started talking about some wild stuff, including a president having a 7 year term. And Alexander Hamilton, the same guy I quoted before, who later became very concerned about monarchs and stuff, at that Constitutional Convention, he actually argued for an elected monarch who would serve indefinitely as long as he exhibited good behavior. And they say that Hamilton's speech was praised by many and supported by none. But there were actually 4 states that voted for it, including one state that Madison was a member of. So it almost carried the day a little bit, or it carried some of the day, but they realized they didn't want to go back to monarchy. They didn't want to go back that way. What they had broken away from, they didn't want to go back to. But here's the thing, and I don't want to go too much longer, but I want to say this fairly succinctly. Ever since then, the executive has been accruing more power. They settled on a president with a 4 year term who could be reelected, right? And then George Washington set the precedent for not taking a 3rd term, which FDR blew away. And he just did a 3rd term and even started a 4th before he died. But now it's the law. You can't have a 3rd term. Let's see if it's adhered to. But Uh, the real problem is that we have been accruing more power to the executive ever since, including Congress is supposed to be the only entity that declares war. But when is the last time Congress declared war? It may surprise you. It's 1942. That's the last time Congress declared war. After Pearl Harbor in early 1942, Congress declares war in World War II. Ever since then, the the Korean, Vietnam, and Iraq wars were not called wars. They were called conflicts or what have you, so that they could get around that. And that's really, really unfortunate. Frankly, I think what we're going to need to do is have a second constitutional convention because we have to redo what has gone awry. There were some checks and balances in the Constitution, including on the executive branch, like impeachment, but there have been several presidents impeached, but nobody's been convicted or removed. So this is a problem. It's now, but it really comes down to, and I'll just share this 1973, the Heritage Foundation was formed. That's when it started. So it's over 50 years ago. The Heritage Foundation ha- hatched the idea for giving more power to the executive. And why do you think they did that? They did that because they wanted to give more power to wealthy people. Let's not make cut any bones about it. So in 1981, under Ronald Reagan's presidency, they wrote something called the Mandate for Leadership. That was written in 1981. That same exact mandate for leadership is in the opening pages of Project 2025, which I confess I could only read the first 15, 20 pages because it broke my heart so much to read it. But that's in there. And that, so they were giving full credit to the idea that came about for a unitary executive in the late 70s and early 80s, and has continued all the way to the present day when the Supreme Court gave complete immunity to the president for official acts. That was really counter to what the founding fathers wanted. So we've got a problem on our hands. If not Mr. Trump, it'll be somebody else unless we change the immunity clause, unless we change Citizens United decision that happened in 2010 that allowed any amount of money to be donated by companies. Unless we change those things, we are sitting ducks to have more and more wannabe dictators who may succeed more than Trump ever will. Enough said. I'm sorry that to be that
No,
long,
that
but that's a
it
long story.
no, but it does help bring in understanding because uh there's lots of confusion in all of it. And the intention, like where I find myself is, relating back to law of nature and recognizing that we live in a law of commerce, which all law to me
Hmm.
comes from law of nature. And that's why there are natural checks and balances within but you got to be spiritual and connected in your psyche and embodying all, and so we think that's the way, and people live that way, and I think that naturally people, we being you are Native American or indigenous to another area, we carry that innate wisdom within us as well as that trauma within us that reminds us of these cycles, the natural cycles, like you mentioned natives had to, or here had to, overcome recognizing when they've taken too much, or like how to live properly with what nature will give
Hmm.
us, right? And how that is in balance of, like, if you tie in Ayurveda, for example, the Indian way, we're there. It's kind of interesting to find these similarities
Hmm.
through these societies, and yet if we're looking at, life as a cycle, and we'll go through these things, and so how academia or people of knowledge have been able to take information and keep it separate from society, I think has been a big issue, or manipulate the history, like we were here before Columbus was here. And to then how that energetically disempowers, but also empowers. And so then when I look at all of this, I see it as, one, we do repeat history. And I kind of see us at like, if you had all the information in the world and knew how to, I use the term manipulate a society through fear to disempower them, then, the way we've moved from a monetary system even to a debt slave system. And I think that was all around, the 80s, which here we are at the end of our empire. And how is that going to morph? And it brings us to a chaotic moment of one, people living in fear of scarcity or not in control, and like any savior, if people are just like, oh, they'll save me. And that's where I want to bring it back to sacred, is like we got to teach people how to fish so that they are empowered when approached with these circumstances that continue in our reality, through, and we have that innate knowledge and wisdom. And I see more and more through the chaos, like you've said, Trump brings in a sense of transparency where many people didn't recognize the underbelly of America, like the slaughter that really went on to get to where we are. And the indigenous that still fight to this day to be here and heard and recognized. And I'm so grateful, to have these tribes coming out of welfare and be able how they use their money as an example, like we can still do good with money. So, and so then, or it's just a resource, right? Or a tool to get things. It's part of alchemy, I see. But for the most part, these chaotic times are the catalyst, right? So that's where, for example, my son is on the spectrum with autism, and I learned a lot about my health because I had to understand what was going on with his health, and it made a great, profound change in my reality. And since then, I have friends who their children had been harmed more by now they're nonverbal. But then if you've heard of the telepathy tapes, where now people who would have never believed in telepathy have actually witnessed it because of the trauma and chaos of however autism comes about. I have my speculations, but through tragedy, there is triumph. That's something I've kind of been carrying with me recently. And knowing, I think why Trump won the second time was because people are, they have that glimpse of some sense of transparency or crashing the system because and many people, of all sides are concerned of these projects and plans been put in place. And it's like when you have so much knowledge and information, you can create that reality where it disempowers. And I think where my intention with this sacred circle is uh empowering the people, like it's welcoming them again to be in touch with their inner indigenous side, even if they're in a city or wherever, but to,
Hmm.
like Master, what was his name, the at the event, the Chinese man, Ming Ming, yeah.
Ming Tongue.
And how he was saying, like where all these people are basically flocking to wellness retreats because they're like disconnected from their body. And in Native American way, if you have disease, it's a spiritual, you connect with that and your food and all this stuff. But here people are looking for a savior. And that's why I think Trump won, was they thought that he's going to be the one that, releases the files and tells us all this stuff. And yes, we're getting a lot of information. And then it's like discernment. How do we discern all of it, like what is what and how, and so that's where for me it's like, okay, the only thing I can hang on to is that the law of nature, and bringing that back to the number one for me is do no harm. And it comes into where, what does harm mean? And that's where then you get in an argument. Like I wanted to talk about colonization, like how the money that got the people here to colonize America is the same money that we're, using to colonize other countries and take out their indigenous. And is that good? Does that cause harm? And when we layer it with the law of commerce, they're going to always say it's good because it's feeding the nations, even though it's actually killing the natives and the food is not nutritious and it's, making it so only a few companies own our world of food, right? If they own the food, they own us,
Mm.
you know? And so it's like, how do we not then empower through fear, right? We can't be empowered through fear. We're always going to be disempowered. And so that's where it's like, we have to be empowered. And how my family did that for me was they taught me to be resilient. We were in poverty, but we had family and we had good
Hmm.
food and we knew how to make food from nothing, because we were left with
Hmm.
nothing and that's what we survived and, later found out it's not good for our health and everybody has diabetes. But, we're learning still. And that's where it was like, if I didn't learn how to craft, right? We look at how the natives been able to, gain wealth or any money was selling their jewelry and creating and being embodied with their self, even as painful as it is. you know and so that's where for me I see this as a sacred time, because one, on the intellectual level,
Mm.
history, we are at a cycle where we're the end of Rome. We're at the end of our empire. And how is that going to shift? And it really is up to each of us individually to be empowered to take the power back and run the nation as it was intended. Sacred. So that's a good
Wow.
segue here.
That's a lot. That's a lot.
Comes
Would you
in my
like me to respond, or do you have a question you want
No, do please respond. I love to hear your
to?
take on my thoughts.
Okay. Well, you put forth a lot of ideas. A while back, you were talking about in the 1980s. That's true. Remember, I was talking about what happened during a Reagan administration, the mandate for leadership. That was also the time when the top income tax got cut from 70% to 33%. So remember, the income tax under FDR was way up like 90%, the top income tax. John F. Kennedy actually cut it down to 70%. So Democrats back then cut taxes. Things change. I mean, Reagan cut it to 33%, and that created the income inequality that our dear Bernie Sanders likes to talk about all the time, because it's all true. Since the 1980s, that's what occurred. So now you talked about money a lot, and you talked about casinos. I've been blessed to live in New Mexico since 1994, and when I first arrived in New Mexico, um, because I'm not a native New Mexican and I'm not Native American. I'm Basque, 25%, 25% Aragon Spanish, and 50% Jewish. So whatever. So that's my background. But when I came to New Mexico in 1994, it was right in the middle of when the tribes were converting to being places where they could do what they called gaming, and the people that were opposed to it called gambling. Depending on what side you were on, you used a different word. Um, at the time, it was just bingo, and they would just put up tents and do bingo. But people came into New Mexico, which I call Las Vegas man. I swear to God, they never touched their foot touched the soil of New Mexico. They got on helicopter from Las Vegas, these consultants, and they landed on top of a casino or something, and then they maybe took a ladder into the place, and they gave advice about how you can't. You have to have them win a certain percentage of the time. They have to be able to win, like, whatever it is, 21.2% of the time, so that they become addicted to this idea of winning sometimes, and then they eventually the house wins. So they were advising the tribes on this. But the beautiful thing that happened in Native America, because let's make no mistake about it, the reason the federal government made a movement to have tribes have gambling establishments or gaming establishments was not out of the goodness of the federal government's heart. This was so the tribes would become like everyone else, that they would become into the financial, they would begin to live their lives thinking of money as the number one priority in their life. But what happened in Native American uh, tribes in New Mexico was kind of beautiful to see, because they the tribes would meet and very carefully discuss what they're going to do with the income that's coming in from gaming. And they were very clear on their priorities. Like in Acoma, they did Head Start first, and then they had senior centers. Many of the other tribes did similar things where they took care of their very young, and then their elders and their vulnerable populations. They always put priorities into that first. Now, I think it all breaks down when there's too much money. So look at the Pequot, who are 150 miles from New York City. And even though they were almost vanquished in 1636, which I actually wrote about in the original Politics, because the Pequot then opened this casino in, Connecticut, and it irked Donald Trump because it became the world's largest casino. But the problem with it was a young person, when they turned 18, would get $1 million right away. And sometimes that was the last day they lived on Earth. An 18-year-old man or boy really, would get $1 million and drive into Manhattan, buy a Lamborghini, get drunk, and that might be the last day he lived. That's really, really sad. So that's not quite happening in New Mexico because there aren't that kind of numbers. We have a relatively small population, relatively small tourist attraction. It's not New York City. Out here, it's actually working much better than the federal government would have ever imagined, and the money is being used to good cause. So I'm glad that you said that. That's about it, as a response. And I don't know how much more time we have, but I'm all yours if you have something else you want to ask.
Oh, I could spend hours listening. I love it. Well, let's see. So, how about I have a half hour if you do. And what I wanted to, I made knowledge of Matza. And okay, so in September, I hosted an event, She Who Remembers, and I had these lovely, powerful women help do some clearing work for me too. And through it, I was like, we need to protect the corn. And then I go to New Mexico and I have this opportunity to meet Joseph and the seed keepers there, and I was gifted a wonderful book. I don't have it with me, but and it I just feel honored, I'm going to be a seed keeper and blah blah blah. And so, you know, remembering my relationship with the corn, and the corn has always been important for my family, but being, seeing through my lifetime where there's been like disconnect. I also want to make note my life I see as a spiral, and so I'll find myself like repeating things, but it could get deeper or more profound, or I can like be relearning a lesson that I haven't figured out yet. And I like see it going in different ways. So that was the cycle of life for me, is not linear, but I do use those points to recognize the line on my cycle in essence. And so, Masa, corn and the sacredness of corn. So let's tap into that and then bring it into, what does sacred mean and how do we embody the practices daily, leading by example through our being.
Oh, beautiful. Yes. Well, that's one of your main purposes is how we walk the sacred path as a way of being, right? And yeah, thank you for mentioning Masa because Making America Sacred Again did, yes, I was very conscious that it spelled out Masa. And I actually designed hats, which you know because you have them, but I don't have them anymore, really. I'm pretty much out of them. But the first one I designed was five colored hat, which red in the front, which of course is also what the MAGA hats were, but this red represents Native America, and it's got a feather to make it really clear, and the brim is black, the sides are yellow and brown, and the letters are white. So it represents the five colors of humanity. And of course, it also represents masa or corn is like very sacred in itself because, most tribal stories talk about humans co-evolving with corn because corn is like a two-legged. It's technically a grass, scientists would say, but it grows up like a two-legged. And in fact, Leon Secatero, my dear elder grandfather Leon Secatero, I should say, his son Sean Secatero, with tutelage from his father, wrote a doctoral dissertation on corn and academe, which connected the spiritual life of an academic student who, when they finally get to the PhD, what do you get when you get to a PhD? You get a tassel. You get a tassel on the top of your head, and you move that tassel from side to side, and that represents that you. Where's that tassel? It's like the sacred corn pollen that represents all things. So yeah, it's a beautiful symbol. Okay, now you're asking how to walk the sacred path as a way of being. That's a difficult question. You know, um, I would say this. I mean, you can have a plan, but you have to follow the signs. You have to trust. One of my favorite quotations in the world came from Ralph Waldo Emerson, and he said, "All our progress is like the vegetable plant. You first have an instinct, then an opinion, then a knowledge. As the plant has root, bud, and fruit. Trust your instinct to the end, though you can render no reason." And then he said, "It is vain to hurry it. By trusting it to the end, it shall ripen into truth, and you shall know why you believe." Isn't that interesting quote? So what it means for me, is trust is really important. Trusting your instinct, trusting in spirit, trusting the ancestors, praying to the living ancestors, and then following the signs. Because you can make plans, but as I don't remember what tradition, it might be Christian that says, man plans and God laughs. I mean, whatever plans we make, something else is going to intervene. But but something I learned from dear grandmother Flor de Mayo years ago, and she did bring up at the conference, and when I was moderating a panel, I made sure to ask her this question, because of the knowledge and wisdom she's carrying on this particular subject. She's thought deeply about how walking on the path is similar to almost a yin and yang. So she has drawn a kind of a Venn diagram, if you want to call it that, like a yin yang symbol. And so she knows that even when we're walking on the spiritual path, there's some darkness that pervades. And we may go off the path, but we have compassion for uh, for ourselves when that happens. And then and then reconnect and rejoin the path that we're supposed to be on. And by the way, it's not just indigenous. I mean, the ancient Greek story of Psyche and Eros has a beautiful example of this. And I do write about this in the new book, Original Love. And, Psyche was given 4 tasks by Aphrodite, the goddess of beauty. And to solve those tasks, in each case, she did it only through involving the wholeness of the natural world. I mean, first she was supposed to separate a giant pile of seeds in a short amount of time, and there's no way a human could have done that. But she prayed, and ant nation came, and the ants separate the seeds into the pile, And then she's supposed to gather the fleece from battering the rams, um, and uh, and she has no idea how to do that because she thinks she'll be gored by the rams. But a reed in the water comes up and speaks to her. And the reed tells her how to gather the fleece of the rams, which is to go in the dark of night, which of course is representing the sacred feminine. And she's going to go into the bushes and trees where the rams brushed against and gather the fleece under the moonlight from there, and then she will succeed. And in the third case, she's supposed to gather the waters of life, which are on the top of the highest mountain. And There's no way she could. And the mountain, the waters of life are guarded by dragons. So how's she going to climb this whole mountain and get past the dragons? Well, there's no way she could do this. But again, she prays, and an eagle is sent, and an eagle goes to gather the waters of life in and takes the vessel and gathers it and succeeds. And then in the fourth case, she's supposed to go to the underworld and to gather the beauty ointment of Persephone, the goddess of the underworld. Now, that's the reason why I'm telling you this story, because this is the only case where she has a lapse. And at first, she's perfect, right? She gets there. She has to put 2 coins in her mouth because she gives one to the ferryman on the underworld on the way in and one on the way out. She carries 2 morsels of bread in her hands because there's a 3-headed dog, Cerberus, that guards the gates. She gives 1 morsel and has the 3 heads argue over it while she gets in, and she does the same thing on the way out. The 3 heads argue over it and she gets out. That's what she was going to do. And she's done all of this correctly. She's done everything until she was forbidden to open. She even gets the beauty jar, but she was forbidden to open that jar. But that's when she lapsed. That's when her vanity got the better of her and she wanted to look inside the jar and know what's this beauty ointment all about. And that's when she goes into more than a lapse, she goes into a death sleep, like Sleeping Beauty or Dorothy and the Wizard of Oz or something. And it's only then that Eros, and I didn't tell half of the story, but that Eros comes back into the picture and saves her and then takes her to Mount Olympus and makes her the goddess of soul. It's only then. So we all lapse, even if it's like written into the story of Psyche, all of us lapse, but all of us can awaken our soul. And I would say that we awaken our soul through love. I know you're the most interested in politics, but I gotta tell right now, I actually ended the book on politics with love because it's the only way out of politics, really. And the best way for our soul to be nourished and enriched and for sacred inclusion to occur is through love. Love is what unites. Everything else divides.
Yeah, no,
Thank you.
I love that. Well, and I love that you tied in one, sharing your heritage, and two, recognizing these stories are global in different ways and tribes and teachings, and through, I guess, who controls history controls the knowledge. So, but it's there, And those are the seeds, that people can go and they'll discover within themselves. Oh, I wanted to share. I have a, let me see if it'll work. No, it's not going to work. I posted the picture that
Oh,
grandmother Florida Maya had drawn up, or her hieroglyph.
oh,
I'll share
yeah.
it. But yeah, and so the that comes back to, okay, what is harm and what is love? And so then I definitely love, well, where I want to get into the intellectual of it is, again, going back to teach a man to fish. And if I love something, this is to tie in the colonization to help people recognize that it's still going on. As now, the powers that be, they track indigenous blood worldwide, and there's 4% indigenous left in this globe. And to me, it's like a map for playing the game of Risk or Conquer and Divide. And that's why they actually care about how much blood there is out there. And then we have to use it to quantify our treaties, right? To protect the land, which many don't quite understand. It's not so that we have all these resources to exploit, but to actually protect Mother Earth and how that land is used, right? And so where I had trouble, we're just gonna go back to politics. Sorry, I love love, but when
That's
looking
all
at
right.
politics, I think many people are driven by our emotion, and because we do carry love, and we think we're doing good things, like sending lots of money to other countries to, fund GMO farms, and that, although bring
Oh,
food to many nations on a commerce level, it's not nutritious. It's not nutritious, and what's happening to the tribes in those areas. And they're saying, get this money out of here, because it reminds me so much of what my ancestors had to deal with, like being my blood had to negotiate these treaties. And without understanding the words and the difference in law of nature and law of commerce, are the intentions are different. And these people know better. When they're spending the money that we pay to help colonize other countries, they know what they're doing. Where we think out of our emotion, out of our love, that we're saving these countries, but we're not. And that's where, how do you delineate tough love and what causes harm? I know that's a hard question, but how do you recognize harm, what's harmful and what's tough love?
hmm. Hmm. Interesting question. Um, hmm. Well, it's sometimes hard to know what's good news or bad news. There's the famous parable about the Chinese farmer who has a horse, and the horse runs away. He gets a second horse or something. He gives the horse comes back. They think it's good news or bad news. The horse ran away. Good news, the horse came back. Is it good news he got a second horse, and then his son rides the horse, his son breaks a leg, and the farmer's asked, oh, that's terrible, and he goes, oh, good news, bad news, who can tell? And then the emperor comes and he wants to take his son to the war where he might have died, but he's not taken because he broke his leg. So he's spared. So I always think about that story when I mean, what is harmful, or there are some things that are clearly, to me, the things that are harmful are the ones that um, are stressing the balance in the ecology. So I don't like to talk about climate change that much, like scientists talk about degrees. To me, what's more real is soil erosion. We've had tremendous soil erosion. And if you Google, this is something Charles Eisenstein did, and I I know, and I did the same thing. If you Google the effect of soil erosion on climate change, all you will find is the effect of climate change on soil erosion. They don't get it that soil erosion is prior. So it's like soil, when you erode the soil, when you don't care of the soil, when you plant the same plant over and over again, it cannot survive unless you use these fertilizers and these pesticides. And these pesticides, the food that you're calling GMO is a pesticide that people are eating for food. And it's just really that's pretty obvious that that's harmful. Um, and and hopefully we will learn this lesson, but we're not learning it. We're still going on the same idea that, as you spoke about the law of commerce, we're still trying to produce all this food, never mind whether it's good for us or not. We're just trying to get volume, 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 turn up the volume. So simple, small. E.F. Schumacher wrote a book a long time ago, Small and Beautiful. I believe that was the title, or Small is Beautiful. It's true. I mean, we need to go back to simple things and grow food in smaller amounts and get away from mass farming. That is obviously harmful to the planet. But you also asked what is love?
Well,
So what is
like,
harmful? And
so
about delineating tough love, right? Go
yes,
ahead.
so we, out of love, I think people agreed to sending $1.5 trillion to these other countries, which is actually colonizing them. And we think it's because we love them. I'm sorry, and I wish it were, but where the tough love, still, I grew up with a lot of dark. So I've learned to understand the dark and taught the light. And so I tend to see, and maybe it's my innate trauma, from my indigenous or all of my lineage and heritages, being traumatized by colonization. Um, but I always see it like firsthand. Now, people don't realize industrial farming is not good for us. They think it's saving the world. And so the tough love for that would be,
Yes.
well, here's the truth. Actually, it's not. And then you argue all over all of that. Like we make it rain chemicals, to justify it. It's everything's so backwards. And so then we get caught up in that, but it's like, okay, so the tough love is yes, we're all going to have to one learn how to survive again. You're going to break it down to where we support, hopefully subsidize our farmers to convert to permaculture, to companion planting, to where each of us does our part to support our farmer that feeds us, or, at least grow our own
Mm-hmm.
gardens. Like one of my sayings was
Mm-hmm.
to fight fascism is to grow your own garden. At least then you're resilient and taking care of yourself. You can't, be taken advantage of if you could feed yourself. And so then the tough love of you know colonization, we think we're saving these indigenous that have been thriving all this time without our system, and we don't think it's appropriate
Yeah.
because they're savage. And so that's where I have trouble communicating my way. It's like, okay, my grandma told me always vote Democrat. And I understand why, as like the intention, but I don't. I think where the confusion is we think we're out saving the world. And the way I show up by sharing my experience, empowering my children by teaching them ways to make money through creativity and their uniqueness, that is the love versus me paying their way. And like, so where I'm trying to like how do we are we really empowering these other indigenous tribes by sending money? I don't know. Are we saving anyone? No.
Okay. May I? Actually,
Yeah.
I can't think of the book, but there's a book by John Perkins that talks about what you're talking about. And actually, it's much more diabolical than you're even speaking of. So the idea of usually it's not giving money; it's usually lending money to so-called developing nations make them dependent upon the United States, and to keep on borrowing and borrowing until we then go in and put our oil and gas industries into those nations, and destroy their ecology. No, it's
Lynch,
um,
it's like a trick. I see it as trickery. Like, oh, we'll sway you with this, they have roads paved of gold, you know. That's where it's like,
yeah,
what is it, the seed that we could plant so people will investigate further? It's not all the magician.
yeah,
Like, that's where I'm having trouble because I know people have good intention, and in their own
right.
sacredness, I see they're, very great beings, but there's a disconnect, and I don't understand I don't know. That's my
Well,
frustration right now.
well, okay, but let's distinguish too. There is a USAID got cut, and that used to be used for some very good purposes. It was the number one agency in the world for helping plagues and pandemics. Well, that's the World Health Organization. Also, sorry, I'm confusing two things there. But USAID brought aid to foreign countries. That is a very small part of the federal budget, but they made a big deal about it. So they cut it. And under Doge, yeah, that wasn't really very bright. So there's a lot of stuff going on. I don't know that we can solve all the world's problems in the next few minutes, but
I
uh,
try. No,
I do.
we can pray on
It,
it.
we can pray on it. Well, if you'll permit me to do something slightly self-serving, I would like to introduce your listeners to. I write a weekly Substack column called "From Politics to Love." So really, when I titled it "From Politics to Love," that was partly not just because I wrote a book on politics and a book on love, but because I really meant it from A to Z, so I could write on anything, and I didn't really have to restrict myself. And that's available. And also, the original love book is now available on pre-order. If you go on Amazon or where, probably that's the only place you can pre-order at this point. Maybe Barnes and Noble. I haven't checked. I should. And independent bookstores, because I know some people don't want to give business to Amazon,
Yeah,
because they are well named. They have something like 60 plus percent of the book business, which is a little scary.
I know.
So, but yeah, I've enjoyed the conversation, and I've got another few minutes only. If you have, is there anything else you wanted to cover, Millie?
No, basically, I appreciate your way of being, and I appreciate you putting your thought into words. And I hope those words we continue to preserve and protect in our digital era. And I'm glad that we can have it on, written text and how, being fully in tune with what your message is. And so I just am grateful that we have this opportunity. And I look forward to picking your brain about seed keeping next. But thank you. I definitely,
Oh. Well, when I started the seed, that was seeds of thought. So I wasn't a seed keeper in the sense that Amiglio is and those other people that you met
okay.
this time. But at the conference, we're talking about the Sacred Guardians of Mother Earth conference that was in Santa Fe just recently. But thank you for your sacred intent to bring together a program called Making America Sacred Again, and to bring together uh, thinkers who are on that path in
Mhm.
some way or another. And everybody's a little different, but I'm honored to be the first of many, and I want to offer my blessing that this program unfolds in beauty, and that you represent so many diverse people, and that they all contribute something to the whole, to making this, because it's always a process of making this continent more sacred. That is a really beautiful thing. Thank you for what you're doing.
I think it's an opportunity where we all could show up and use our unique purpose to do it together. So many blessings to you, my
Thank
friend,
you.
and like always, on your
Thank
dreams.
you.
Until the next time.
Thank you. All right.
Bye.
Many blessings. Bye for now.